Some people put their PCs under the table and make sure they stay hidden. Others put them on the display, leave the RGBs on and make sure they are well visible. In this video we're gonna have a look at LianLi O11 Dynamic Mini, which is focused on the second group. There have already been videos made about this case using water cooling, so I'm gonna focus on air cooling and I'm gonna build two builds in it. So, let's get to it. Let's take a look what you get inside the package. An installation guide, thank you card, motherboard extension bracket for mounting ATX and Micro-ATX motherboards, 3 water pump brackets, 2 slot covers, screws and spacers for mounting the motherboard, anti-vibration rings for 2.5-inch drives, power supply screws and fan screws, 5 cable ties, and of course the case itself, at which we'll look at right now. Let's take a look at the dimensions. The height of the case is 38.1 centimeters, the depth is 42.1 centimeters, and the width is 26.9 centimeters. When we compare this case to a full-size mid-tower case, it is shorter and not as deep, which makes it easier to place even on smaller and thinner desks. It is a little wider, but it shouldn't cause any problems because the size difference is small. The case is made of aluminum and a tempered glass and weighs 8.5 kilograms without the accessories installed, just as you see it now. It is much lighter compared to regular mid-tower cases. Besides the black version that you can see now, there's also a white version available. When we look at the back side, we can see that it has a modular panel design which allows using 3, 5 or 7 slot configurations. This means that it can accommodate Mini ATX, Micro-ATX and ATX motherboards. I'll be testing this case with a standard ATX motherboard. So let's take a look at the options first. Out of the box, the case is in 7 slot configuration for standard ATX motherboards. Let's reconfigure it and take a look at how 5 slot setup looks like. So this is the 5 slot configuration for Micro-ATX boards. 1 slot cover is used at the top, and now let's move on to the last 3 slot configuration. So this is how the 3 slot configuration for Mini ATX boards looks like. As you see, there are 2 slot covers used at the top. Now I'll remove the top dust filter and both tempered glass panels and the back metal side panel so that I can start assembling the PC. When we look at the back side of the case, we can see this dedicated space, which is for air intake, which can house 240mm fans or 320mm fans. Next to it is this removable metal panel, which allows mounting two 2.5-inch hard drives or SSDs. You can mount them from the front or from the back of this panel. Here at the top is a space for placing the SFX or SFX-L sized power supply. Let's take a quick look at a comparison to a standard ATX power supply. Let's check out the differences in size of both power supplies. Seasonic is 17 centimeters deep and Be Quiet only 13, so that's quite a big difference. And when it comes to width, Seasonic is 15 centimeters wide and Be Quiet only 12.5. When it comes to height, Seasonic is 8.6 centimeters tall and Be Quiet only 6.5. And this is the front view with the connectors. Under the power supply area there is this small drive cage which can accommodate two 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drives. So let's take a look at it. When we look at the inside of the case, we can see that there is plenty of space, even for large components. The holes for cables in the middle have these rubber protectors, which is a nice touch because you won't injure your hands when you're doing cable management or scratch the cables. If you want to use an ATX sized motherboard, you will need to use this motherboard extension bracket that was part of the accessories. And because I'll be using full ATX motherboard, that's why I'm going to install it right now. When it comes to ventilation, there are plenty of options here for placing the fans, but none are pre-installed, so you'll have to use your own, which of course adds to the price. But it's at the same time a possibility for you to be creative and customize the look based on your preferences. I'll talk more about fan placement after I install all components inside. One thing that I think is a nice touch is that these holes have numbers beside them for every slot configuration, so you know where to place the standoffs. And before I start assembling the PC, let's look at the back. As you can see, there is plenty of space for ventilation and a dust filter, so let's take a look at it. As you see, the dust filter can be removed. And that's pretty much it, what we can say, so I'll start assembling the PC. Now that I have some experience building in this case, let me share a few tips with you and some takeaways. And let's start with the top I/O. This small thin panel surrounding the I/O is made of acrylic. There are two USB 3.0 type A ports, which means that they run at 5 gigabit speed, and one USB 3.1 Gen 2 type C port, which means that it runs at 10 gigabit speed, and one audio jack which is close to the power button. They have enough space in between them, so all can be used at the same time, and they worked fine. One important thing which is worth mentioning before you start using this drive cage, and which took me a few minutes to figure out, is that before you can slide out these drive caddies, there is a locking mechanism in place. It's pre-installed there from the factory. It is this metal part which is stuck there, and it prevents the drive caddies from sliding out during the transport. So what you'll need is to unscrew these 4 screws which hold this drive cage in place and remove this part from this space, and then you'll be able to start using it. I was curious about cooling of the hard drives, so I connected two 4TB Seagates ST4000D M004 drives and started playing two 4K videos simultaneously, one from each of the drives. I was pleasantly surprised that after 1 hour of playback, the temperatures of the drives has risen only by 1 degree Celsius, from 34 to 35 degrees Celsius, while the ambient was 26 degrees Celsius. This is a great result, and probably the fact that there are 240mm fans installed for intake into the case has a lot to do with it. One of the things that will make your life much easier when building inside this case is connecting this 8-pin from the power supply to your motherboard 8-pin first before you install both these fans. Because if you install them first, you won't be able to reach it comfortably or at all, depending on how thick fans you use. So that's really important and might save you some time. When it comes to fans installation, you can install the first top one with all ATX sized motherboards. Some, like this Gigabyte Aorus Master, have bigger plastic I/O cover, which will interfere with the fan. Gigabyte X570 Aorus Elite had no problem with it. One of the solutions might be using a thinner 15mm fan, or not using this first top fan at all. If you use smaller mini or Micro-ATX boards, you won't have this problem because you can place the motherboard a little bit lower. Another building tip which is worth mentioning is keeping some distance between the fans so that you can use it for later cable management, and this might save you some time. And the last tip concerning this upper area of the case is not over tightening these fan screws, because the frame isn't as hard as rest of the case and you might bend it. The airflow is limited by small holes in the panels, but the dust filters are removable, and if you do it, it will improve the airflow and the temperatures, but it will also allow more dust to get inside when the case is switched off. Two more things that you might find useful when installing the fans inside this case, or actually trying to control their speed, especially if your motherboard doesn't have enough PWM fan headers, is considering using a fan hub, which will allow you to control the fans manually from outside the case, independently on any software, just using these controllers. It is SATA powered, so it has enough juice to control all of the fans. I found this on AliExpress for $7, and I can't really tell you how it's called because it doesn't have any name or brand, but I found it as 8-fan hub. To be able to use it, I will put it into the last slot, and because the fans might not have long enough cables, I'll be using this fan extension cable to be able to reach them. In case you're using a large CPU cooler like me now, what might happen to you is that one of the fans would be sticking out of the case and you won't be able to close it. The maximum allowed height of the CPU cooler heatsink is 170 mm, which means you won't be able to use Noctua NH-D15 or Zalman CNPS20X with one of the fans raised above the memory modules, unless you use low profile RAM modules with small heatsinks, or unless you exchange the 140 mm fan above them for a smaller 120 mm fan, which is what I did in the end, or unless you remove this fan completely, which would have impact on cooling performance. This is how the solution using one 120 mm fan instead of 140 mm fan looks like. If you're thinking of using water cooling, you won't be able to use any radiators placed at the top in combination with ATX sized motherboards, only with mini or micro-ATX boards. So owners of full-size boards should take note of this. To cool the CPU with ATX sized motherboard, you can use 240 or 280 mm radiator with fans for intake from the side. If you're thinking of using mini ATX board, you can place the radiators up to 360 mm in length, both on the top and the bottom part of the case, plus one 280 mm in the middle. You might be asking, why would anybody use these small boards with this case? And the answer is that they don't care about the connectivity and having PCI Express slots, but they want to use large 3-slot GPUs like this one for performance. If you're thinking of using Micro-ITX board and placing it in the middle of the case, then you can't use 280 mm radiator at the bottom, but you can use 360, which would be thinner. What you need to think about is how many PCI Express cards you are going to use to make sure they don't interfere. I'm not a huge fan of using bottom case fans because the dust naturally settles on surfaces, including the table, and they just suck it inside the case. On the other hand, if you use them, it will improve GPU temperature significantly. So if you have some more powerful GPU, like this 3-slot, they will help a lot. You'll just have to clean the bottom dust filter more often. Also make sure that you run all of your fans below 1000 RPM, otherwise the noise coming from the case, which is placed on the table and therefore close to your ears, will bother you, especially if you are as noise sensitive as I am. I can't tell you exactly how many RPM should you use, because it mostly depends on how much heat your system dissipates, which will be dependent on which components you picked for your setup and how you run it. So you'll need to find some balance between performance and noise. One of the things where I would like LianLi to go back in time is start using this old vent cover, which is from my old maxed out 2011 2600K PC using LianLi PC7F case. As you see, the fan cover has more space for airflow and is even removable completely because you can unscrew these screws and take it out. This solution allows unrestricted airflow and lowers the noise output at higher RPM fan settings because of the lower friction of air with the cover. The current solution probably saves cost, but it isn't a step in the right direction, in my opinion. Other case manufacturers are guilty of using this solution as well. Let's sum it up. Building in this PC was very easy, thanks to both removable side glass panels, so even first time builders shouldn't have any problems building in it. This case is primarily focused on looks and not cooling performance, so if you're thinking of breaking any world benchmark records, then this is not the case for it. But if you're building a gaming PC and you want something sleek looking with RGBs, then this is definitely worth considering. I don't usually build my PCs with RGBs at all, and I put them under the table. But this experience might have changed my mind a little bit, so I'll see what I'll do in the future. It was kind of warm and inviting whenever I came back to this PC. And I think I have covered everything I wanted in this video. So thank you for watching and see you in the next one.